from the solicitor, where he wants it to be.
Welcome to the Finance Committee meeting for May 17th, 2023. It is about 6:31 p.m. Roll call, Amber.
Mr. Ghost,
Here.
Mr. Martin,
Here.
Mayor St. John,
Here.
Mrs. Cooper, here, Mr. Grumney,
Here.
Mr. Capel,
Here.
and Murray Neff is absent.
Okay, thank you. Let's go to the minutes from our last meeting, which took place on April 19th, last month, 2023. Motion for approval.
Motion.
Motion by Mr. Grumney. Is there a second?
Second.
Second by Mr. Mayor. Discussion.
Under the unfinished business item, we have Mr. Stefan here instead of Mrs. And I don't think he was here at that meeting, so.
Correction duly noted by Amber.
Thank you.
Okay, no further discussion. Roll call on the approval of the minutes from April 19th.
Mr. Grumney,
Yes.
Mayor St. John,
Yes.
Mr. Capel,
Yes.
Mr. Ghost.
Yes.
Mrs. Cooper, yes, Mr. Martin,
Yes.
6 yeas.
Okay, we're on to new business. And this evening we have two major items. I believe Daryl is here, Mr. Hennessy, to talk about the facilities financing term and NTE borrowing.
I am. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. All right. So on packet page, I think it's 3. No, it's 3. Yeah, it is 3. I'm going to talk through the chart a little bit, but let me give you an update on where we are with the facilities planning project. So we completed the 60% design, meaning MS Consultants has completed that design. That design included, some additional details regarding the finishes. We did tweak some of the plans a little bit. For example, we did tweak the entry for the police department to their building. We've adjusted the restrooms a little bit to better fit their needs. We moved one of the interior walls in the municipal building. But again, those are tweaks at the margins, nothing that significant. After the consultant, the architect finished the 60% drawings, they sent the drawings out to a construction firm to do an estimate. So we had talked about this earlier, that we wanted to have a construction firm do that so we could get a better sense of what was really happening in the market today. So that estimator came back. The pricing above is what they provided. And again, I'll walk through that in just a second. What happens next is we will receive 90% drawings here in the next week or so. The architect is currently working on the bid documents as well. And so hopefully we'll have an opportunity to respond to the 90% drawings. It'll be a quick turnaround, but that and the bid documents, we should be ready to go public with the bid documents or open the bid process in the early to mid-June timeframe. So that is a little bit ahead of where we thought we would be when we talked about this last time.
So that's still all presumably ahead for the financing deadline too.
Yes.
Okay.
And yeah, we'll talk definitely a little bit more about that schedule. Also, we can talk a little bit about it tonight. We'll definitely be talking a lot more about it at the next meeting. When the bid documents are released publicly, we will also be submitting the materials to the building department, the Delaware County Building Department, and the fire department for any additional comments that they might have. We can do that simultaneous with the bid process. So in late June, we'll come back with a bond ordinance to council, actually to the Finance Committee meeting, with an expectation that we'll take it to the council for a first reading at that June meeting on June 21st. And then by the end of July, after all 3 readings, hopefully you'll be comfortable with the amount and we'll be ready to approve the bond ordinance. The construction award is expected to happen sometime in the August timeframe. So if we award the contract in August, we had built in a 30-day window for the contractor to mobilize. And at that point, they could be here in the September-ish timeframe. Again, just a little bit ahead of the schedule that we had talked about when we talked about this the last time, probably 3 or 4 months ago. We've gone back and forth a little bit in terms of phasing the project. It looks like the contract engineer or the contract estimator says that they would anticipate it's a an 8-week project in total if you layer them one behind the other. That said, there still may be some advantage to us doing that because we could finish the police department, move the police department out, vacate the city hall for maybe a month as opposed to a 6-month window, move the city hall staff back or the administrative staff back down into the basement. They could finish the upper level and what have you. So we'll be talking a little bit more about that phasing here in just a little bit. So that's what's coming up in terms of the schedule on this, the facilities plan. So the table itself then. So what I've done here is if you begin to the left, the conceptual plan was the very first set of drawings that the architect sent to us. And the estimates that they have there, are based upon a design that did not include, any kind of detailed analysis of, structural walls and the like. Didn't have the finishing elements in it. It had some high level estimates of mechanicals and those types of issues. So when we came to you with that, it was a $4.16 million construction project. If you add the acquisition in, it ends up being, it was about a little over $5.2 million when we talked about the conceptual design. The next column, column B, council's guidance. What we had done is we tried to skinny the project back a little bit. This is where we decided not to finish the lower level on the administrative office or the municipal building. This is where we decided against maybe reconfiguring all of the office space over in the police department. And so we went back to the contractor and we said, could you deliver for us or design for us a project that's more in the $2.5 million range for renovations alone? Then you add the $1 million plus in for the acquisition. So again, we were about a $3.5 million, but when you add the design, it almost got to a $4 million project. Okay. So keep that number in mind, the $4 million number. Now they've come back with a 60% design. That's column C. And so rather than a $2.45 million project, the estimator says it looks like it's more in the $3.11 million range based upon the detailed design work that's been done. So over in the far right-hand column, we're basically about $660,000 higher than where council wanted to be. But again, that was based on some assumptions that, we were trying to make at the time. So if you add the design fee, the acquisition cost, the total cost of this project is now in the $4.52 million range. So as I said earlier, remember and that includes acquisition and design. So remember when we had that conversation about the council guidance, that was close to a $4 million project. So $4.5 million again, that's roughly where we wanted to be, around 4. They're coming back with something that looks more like the $4.52 million. And again, that's an estimate. That's not a contractor bidding on the project. I will say that the architect has indicated to us, the contractor that did the estimate has indicated to us, they do think it actually will be an attractive project because of the timing, the time of the year that it'll be done. It's a winter project. It'll be an indoor project, and that'll be primarily what they're doing. So they really think that we're going to get a fair number of bids. So we're cautiously optimistic on that too. So anyway, so before I go into the estimates of what the debt service might look like on that, that's where we are in terms of cost of the project, the estimated cost of the project. So why don't we stop there? And questions or comments, thoughts, concerns?
Anything, Mr. Mayor?
This is more tactical, but I know you just mentioned it's primarily indoor. What about the outdoor of the municipal building? Is there anything included? I'm thinking windows, siding, roof.
No, great point. So actually the municipal building includes the replacement of all the windows. It includes, there's a fair amount of woodwork where the bees have been eating through some of the wood. So there's definitely some trim work that they'll have to do to replace and put that back on. They're doing an inspection of the roof and a cleaning of the roof. They're not replacing the roof in this proposal. And then, those are probably the big elements on the exterior. We'll paint it as well. So there may be a little bit of delay in terms of when they'd be able to paint it. Same thing then for the police department. So the police department will have a fair number of windows that are replaced with bulletproof glass. They'll have some block work that's done to basically reduce some of the windows or eliminate some of the windows and doors. That's also going to be painted on the exterior. They've got an exterior shed to be constructed as well. So there are definitely some exterior items. You're right. I shouldn't have said it's not exclusively interior.
That's okay. I just wanted to make sure.
Yeah,
the
no,
scope
that's good.
and those things were included. Okay, no questions.
That's good.
Thank you.
Police chief and staff are satisfied with where it's headed, correct?
The police chief has been involved from the very get-go.
Yep.
I do think the chief is happy with the design that we've got.
Is it safe to say he got everything he wanted or a large percentage?
Oh, he got a large percent, absolutely a large percentage of what he wants. And I think it's the only thing he's asked me a little bit about now is maybe an interior wall to separate something that's back in the back room with the training space. But he's agreed. Well, let's see how it works first before we go ahead and add that wall. He had asked a little bit about the location of the generator. We've moved the generator to accommodate that request. So I think you should ask the chief, but I think the chief is happy with what we've got.
And on that note, do we decide to cover parking and pave parking lot or one or the other?
Yeah, so it doesn't have the paved parking. It doesn't have the paving of the parking lot in this portion of the project, but we are committed to parking or to paving it, I think, at some point.
Is there any cost for upgrading or a repair to that parking lot at all in this proposal?
Not in this proposal, no. But it does have the exterior parking. So they are the shed. But we're gonna
The canopy type?
yeah, it'll be three-sided. Yeah, three-sided, and it'll have electricity in it so that they can plug in the cars and, warm them up, that type of thing. So lighting as well out there. We are going to, I think, include that as an alternate so that if the bids come back and they're higher than maybe what we're comfortable with, that might be something we would choose to do at a later point. So we are going to get pricing on that as a separate item.
Any other questions?
And maybe with that, I don't know, maybe that's a good point, Mayor. Maybe we should just get alternate pricing on to pave the parking lot then as well. Maybe we should, I will let that. Yeah.
Thank you.
All right. So that's where we are in terms of the estimates. And then immediately behind that spreadsheet is are two scenarios that have been run by Baker Tilly in terms of what the annual debt service of the bonds would cost. So we've got a $4 million option, and then we had a $4.52 million option, which yeah. Everybody see what we're talking about? Okay. There are a lot of numbers on the page, but let's start with the $4 million option. So draw your attention to maybe a couple of important lines. One is it assumes a AAA rating for the city. We have asked whether that's likely to happen. And Brian Cooper is very optimistic that we'll get a AAA bond rating. So not guaranteeing it, but he's pretty confident that the city the financial condition of the city is such that we will get a rating, a very, very high rating. The other thing to maybe look at, or another thing to look at, the all-inclusive costs, the charge for a 20-year bond, 3.87%. 25 years, 4.10, 30 years, 4.22. So we had asked Baker Tilly to run the scenarios for us back in September. And so when they ran these numbers back in September, the all-inclusive costs actually were about 0.5 point higher than they are today. So the market is in a better position today than it was back then. And then the debt service, estimated 20, 25, 30 years, you can see ranges from a little short of $238,000 to $301,000. When you go back and look at the September scenario, it's basically $10,000 to $20,000 per year less than the estimate that they did back in September. So and they only did an estimate on the $4 million option. And then if you go to the $5 million option, kind of roughly the same thing. The all-inclusive costs come down a little bit for a 20-year bond at 3.83. But the annual debt service, again, this is on a higher bond amount, is around $340,000. per year. So, I think we're in pretty good shape. We'd done the cost analysis back in September. We're very comfortable with $300,000 range in terms of annual debt service. One of the questions we'll have for council this evening, or for the finance committee this evening is, do you want us to go back and talk to the finance team about a 20-year bond, a 25-year bond, or a 30-year bond? So it's just a clarifying point. At the June meeting, we'll bring in front of council a bond ordinance that'll spell out what kind of term you're looking for in terms of the financing.
And that would include like a not to exceed amount, right?
And then we also have to choose a not to exceed amount as well.
Payoff penalties on these loans generally. If you want to pay it off early, for example, that's what, if you want to pay it off early.
I don't know, but I'll make sure that they're ready to answer that. So I should have said, Brian Cooper, the city's financial advisor, Chris Franzman, the city's bond counsel, Dave Collinsworth, who's been providing advice to the city through this project. They'll all be here at the June meeting. So I'll make sure that they're ready to answer that question. I should know that, but I don't.
I would, since this is a bond and not a loan, I mean, it's almost like an investment tool for, I don't know, like private brokerages and things like that. They're like, oh, we're going to put our money in stocks or securities, and municipal bonds are fixed and they're very predictable rate of returns. My guess is there would be a prepayment penalty because, they've dropped $4.5 million in here and they want like a continual payout over a certain amount of time, and they're going to make a certain amount of time or a certain amount of money. That's what I would guess.
Yeah, I will definitely ask
That's
that
an
question.
important answer.
Yeah.
How
Well, I think we-
practical,
I'm sorry.
I'm sorry. Go ahead.
I was gonna say, one other thing that might be a good thing to ask Baker Tilly is whether or not they will write into the ordinance if the bonds are callable or not. Because that could could bear.
Mhm.
So how practical is it to pay the amount that it would take to pay it off in 20 years rather than 30 years? Because it makes quite a bit of difference
Yeah,
financially.
you save $500,000 in interest.
So
But the net present value, I mean, I think we need to talk about, have them advise us on some of these options.
Mhm.
Are we really going to come out of this meeting with a, we're going to go 20, 25 or 30?
well, I think we want some guidance, I guess, to give to the bond council. So let me say this, a couple of things in terms of the term. The design was done with roughly a 15-year time horizon. I mean, we're growing so fast that, where are we going to be in 15 years? Are we still going to, is it still going to be big enough to accommodate the municipal staff or the police department down there? So, we went back and forth a little bit on terms of how long to think about that, but I think we, again, landed on roughly a 15-year time horizon for the design purposes. So with that, that may be something to keep in mind. I will say that Dave Collinsworth feels very strongly, although he's not the financial advisor here, feels very strongly that this should be a 20-year bond because of the rapid growth that's happening in the city and the likelihood that there may be another facilities project that comes online in the next 15, 20 years. So you don't want this lingering debt, going on for another 10, 15 years when you're basically trying to, update the facility a little bit. So I, just a couple of things maybe to keep in mind. If you've got some general thoughts on that, we can ask the financial advisor to kind of address that when they come before you next month.
Yeah, I mean, I tend to lean towards like the actual, I mean, think of like the investment or excuse me, the debt, the actual usable life, like you try to line those up as much as possible. I mean, because, Dave Collinsworth is right. We're going to be growing. There's most likely going to be other improvements, either additions to those buildings or purchase of new or something that is going to happen before even 20 years, right? And then, you're paying on this building and now you're starting on another. That's kind of the cycle that schools get into often. They do these 33, 35 year building bonds and then you're building a new one every 15 years, it's like, oh shoot, it's like you're behind the 8 ball. The other
Well,
thing
Yeah,
go ahead.
and I was just saying, one other thing related to that, I mean, keep in mind, when we started this project, we thought we were also going to do a maintenance building as well.
Right.
So the maintenance building has kind of fallen off and we're still looking at a $4 million project. So what happens to the maintenance facility? Yeah, there will be more facility needs for the city within this 15-20 year time horizon.
I wanted to throw out one thing that I've been thinking about. So we paid cash for the property, right? And the idea was we were going to roll in that purchase into this bonded amount. I think that kind of makes sense, but I mean, if we wanted to pull that portion out, we've already paid for it, not bond it, do a lower bond amount, lower debt service, lower payment. I mean, it's all like, it's not on our balance sheet right now anyways.
Yeah.
I mean, all it would be doing if you bonded it is you're taking your own money, putting in the debt and then just dropping the balance of $1.1 million into our bank account, right?
And then you're paying interest on it.
Right. So I think that's an option that we should look
That's
into. And I understand like
definitely
there's
an option.
the lower we borrow, the lower amount that we borrow, we're gonna get a higher interest rate. But I mean,
We need to see the difference.
yeah, we need to see, I think we need to see the two options.
Well, and that's, if you go back to the table on page 3, I mean, that was the reason I wanted to show you the straight construction costs. That's column C. That if you took out the design costs and you took out the acquisition costs, which if
We're paying for, right? The
Right.
design too.
right,
Right.
that is, yeah, those are all built in to get us to 4.5
Right.
million. It includes the design reimbursement for the design fees. So yeah, I mean, the construction part of this project is more like a $3 million project. So that's an important point to keep in mind. And yeah, I mean, there are a whole bunch of different ways that you can skin this cat, as they say, right? I mean, another way to think about it is, would you really want to finance the acquisition of the services building with a project that has nothing to do with the services department whatsoever? So again, trying to capture the 300,000 associated with the purchase of that building, might not be really, consistent
Yeah, it doesn't
with
make
what we're trying to do here.
Right.
So,
Dana, can I ask a question? Okay, so going back to if you drop the $1 million we paid for the building into the debt, we're paying interest on that. Based on our investment strategy, is there any chance on that $1 million though that we would the $1 million that we put back in our account because now it's financed through debt, would that earn more interest than what we're paying on interest for the debt portion? Does that make sense?
It could potentially, although with interest rates being or fluctuating, you're going to be paying interest on that $1 million over 20 years or 30 years, depending on the term. So
Right.
I think that any interest that you're going to earn on $1 million sitting in your bank account is not going to come close to the amount of interest that you're going to pay on that over
As a
20
debt,
years.
okay.
Mhm.
Okay. All right, thanks.
Yeah, like we are, I think the one thing yeah, I'm trying to think of how to spin this. I'm not trying to spin it. I'm literally trying to think of my gut reaction based on this sum of all parts that I'm looking at is we don't go and issue debt on money that we've already paid
I agree.
Mhm.
and on the design. I mean, I'm trying to think of it in human terms, like what that would actually be like. Like you bought the kids Christmas gifts and then you go out and say, I want to have the cash that I use pay the Christmas gifts. So I'm going to take a cash advance on my credit card. Like, that doesn't make sense.
Agreed.
In certain interest environments, it could make sense,
You're right.
but not
You're
this one
Yeah.
right now. I don't think that's.
Does the debt service payment come out of the general fund?
For this, yes, it would. Yes.
So that's a couple 100,000 roughly, isn't it? Based on the scenarios.
Yes.
Okay.
So to that point, again, if we finance just the direct cost of the construction, it look again more like a $3.1 million project, or more like a $3.1 million bond. And again, we don't have the final number either. That's the other important point to note that, I mean, the number could come in at, 2.9. I mean, it could come in at 3.5 too. So that's one thing to keep in mind, which kind of gets to the next point, which really is, we do need to think about a not to exceed amount that will ultimately end up in the bond. And again, we're going to do 3 readings on the bond. So we're not asking council the next time to like finalize your financing. We're not. we're just trying to introduce a bond ordinance to to get the process started. But I did talk to Chris Franzman about the not to exceed amount. And Chris's advice to me was, he said, I would estimate 10% higher than whatever the direct costs, you think the direct costs are going to be. So for a $3.1 million project, you're talking about another $300,000. So you're at $3.5 million in your not to exceed amount. Not to exceed doesn't mean that you're going to borrow that amount. It just means that, you could borrow up to that amount if you absolutely had to and wanted to. If we decide, if the bids come in and they are $3.5 million, we had a not to exceed $3.5 million, but you still weren't comfortable with the debt service, and we could go find some cash in the account, pay some of that down, and still go with a $3 million bond. Again, there are lots of different scenarios that we could consider, but
And you don't have to nail down that exact amount that you're going to borrow until the day that the bond, or the day before the bonds go to sale. So we've got time.
Is that when we actually sign the bid? Like we get bids in, and is that when after we sign it to lock it in that, or?
Not necessarily.
yeah.
No, the sale of the bonds will occur on a date that is set by bond counsel. When they go to sell them, it's typically after you know the set price and you know exactly how much you're going to need. Then they'll know the exact amount they need to borrow, building in all of the financing costs, add that into the bonding, and they work their magic.
So based on our original financing schedule, we had the city council approval of the construction contract sometime in early September. Again, that could be in August now because we're a little bit ahead of schedule. And the actual closing on the bonds happens like 30 days later. So
Okay, that's
yeah,
close.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Again, based on this schedule, which again, it's the preliminary schedule, but yeah.
Okay, anything further?
So maybe I've heard the mayor say, again, that the hard construction cost looks like a good place to maybe be.
I'm just gonna put like a term and a number just so everybody can grab it, and then like, let's move up
Yes,
and down from there. I'll say like not to exceed 3.2 million for 20 years. That's,
For proposed bond package.
yeah, and that would not include the acquisition or design fees. In other words, we're paying for those already or have paid for. Let's not go issue debt for it. And that's just, I guess, open for discussion.
Dana, go ahead.
I would just caution you not to go too low on that, because you could always say 4.5 and still expect to just pay 3.1 million. So the not to exceed amount is kind of, I don't want to say arbitrary, but it's a number that, if you were to set it very low at 3 and then the bids came in ultra high, then you'd have to go get another bond ordinance, go through another 3 readings. I think it makes more sense to just aim a little higher.
If we were to take the $1 million out though, just doing apples to apples with this 4.52, so 3.52 would be a direct comparison. Then if you're
So
taking.
we're actually taking $1.4 million out, not just $1 million.
Million for the design
Yeah.
and the 1.1.
Yes,
Oh, okay. All right. So that gets you back down to the number you were talking about.
yeah.
yeah, I think if Chris Franzman were here, he would say the same thing she just said.
Probably 3.5 or 4.
I
4
bet you
mil.
that's where Chris would probably be comfortable, but again, that's.
I would say 4. With the understanding that you're not going to borrow money for the repayment of the $1 million or the whole 1.4 for the design and the building.
For over a 20-year term.
That would be my recommendation. Yes, 20 years.
Mm-hmm.
The cost to borrowing is just lower in general for 20 years. And we can do it. The cash flow is such that it's doable.
Mr. Hennessy, any other thoughts, recommendations?
You
You need an answer or guidance
just guidance, just guidance.
for the next meeting.
That
We'll have
policy says that the director of finance makes those recommendations,
okay.
but I support
So,
I'm comfortable with the 4 million and 20-year term.
Yeah.
Up to,
It's gonna come
if
in that high,
needed.
but I'm comfortable with that as well. What
Yeah.
do you think?
All right, well, that would be enough to get, at least they can draft the bond ordinance. We can do this, well, I guess if it's 4 million, we know roughly what those costs are gonna be. But maybe we could have them run a scenario that's more around 3.1 million. Just again, if the direct construction costs came in at that amount, what that might look like. All right. That's, yeah. That's
Very
what I
good,
needed.
very good, thank you. Okay, so that sort of dovetails with our next item, J.R. Smith Park financing options and recommendation. I talked to Dana a few days ago and asked her to come up with some options that we could consider in the finance committee for future investment in J.R. Smith. We still don't know what the total costs are gonna be, but I gave her some ranges and numbers, basically 3 million max to work with. And then this is what she produced, these 5 options, and then her personal recommendation here on the last page. But go ahead, Dana.
Okay, thank you, Chairman.
Mhm.
Yes, as Mr. Ghost mentioned, I came up with some options for you to consider. Of course, these are not, this is not every option that's out there. These are just a few that I came up with. So this is open to discussion. And of course, as Mr. Ghost mentioned, the cost is still an unknown. But I estimated 3 million based on guidance from Mr. Ghost, and I'll go through these one at a time. Starting at the top, we could borrow an additional 3 million over 20 years to pay for the park upgrades. Now, this dovetails from our previous conversation of bonding. The debt service would increase by about $250,000 a year, estimated. And in speaking with Baker Tilly, with Brian Cooper, most communities have unvoted debt maximum, which this would be an unvoted debt of 10 to 15% of their total income tax revenue. So for the city of Sunbury, that would mean about $580,000 roughly. When I calculate the estimated income tax of 3.9 million, 15% of that, I believe, is 582,000, if I'm recalling correctly.
Okay,
So currently, Sunbury's current annual debt service with the non-enterprise, non-TIF is 173,000, which is about 4.4% of our estimated revenue. So right now, we're currently way below the 10 to 15% range. The impending new bond issue on what we've just been discussing to fund the facility renovations will roughly add $300,000 annually, which would bump our percentage up to about 12.1%. So right within that 10 to 15% range.
so we're in the comfort zone, the
We're in the comfort
middle zone,
right
but
now.
that's after we do what we just talked about with facilities.
Correct.
Not
So-
much more wiggle room here.
Yeah, not a whole lot more. And again, this is just an average, best practice scenario. So if we were to add another $250,000 of debt service, that would put us up to 18.5% of income tax revenue. So that's option number one. Option number two, we could, it's kind of funny, Mayor, I was laughing to myself. What you had mentioned about taking the $1 million out is what I actually wrote in here and do recommend doing. So I would reduce the borrowing for the facilities from 4 million to 3 million,
Mhm.
and then add,
You said you were comfortable with 4 million a minute ago.
well,
Not to exceed.
not to exceed, and yeah. But then also add another $2 million for a park project.
I see. So you can put these together in one bond.
If it's written in such a way, I believe I would have to go to council and ask, or bond council and ask them if they could do that. I'm not sure. And I'm not trying to put the cart before the horse here, because I know we're ready to move forward with the facilities bond, not necessarily with this, but I wanted to kind of throw it into the whole discussion.
Mhm.
Because going to the bond market is, kind of a big deal. It's a lot of time. It's expensive. If we definitely wanted to move forward with a large additional bonding for a park project, it would be a good time to do it if we rolled it all into one package. It would save money. It would save time. It would just be a wise thing to do if we're ready to do that.
I think we have to be, like, there's gotta be something, you have to be in contract or something, we should talk to bond counsel, but I feel like there are some stipulations about like what you can issue bonds for. Like, it can't just be an arbitrary, hey, we need cash right now.
Right, it does, it is stipulated
Yeah.
for sure in the ordinance, what you can use the money for, right?
So
By
we get,
June, we can know the answer to that, though.
Sure. Sure.
we'll push CT for some estimates.
So if we were to do that, meaning taking the facilities project down to 3 million and adding 2 million in for the park, that would put our total bond package around 5 million.
Mhm.
And that would put our current annual debt service up to about 400,000, which is just under 15%, 14.7% of our annual income tax revenue.
So Dan, I may not be connecting dots, I apologize,
That's
but
okay.
if we're saying that to do the park renovations is an estimated 3 million, and in this option, we're dropping it down to 2, or does that mean we're thinking of doing less for the parks then,
Or we've used some of our own money.
Yes.
Okay.
And there are other things that could play into that. So thank you for asking that
grants.
question. There
Yeah,
are
yeah, okay.
some grants and things that could help pay for it, which I'll get into a little bit later.
Okay.
Sunbury is in a strong financial position so that we do not need to borrow the $1 million that was previously paid for the Newman building. Like I've mentioned, cash flows have been such that we do not need to repay ourselves and then pay interest on that repayment. So I would recommend that we don't.
Same thing you were recommending earlier.
Same
right,
thing the
Mr.
mayor would recommend.
Yes, sir.
Okay, option number 3 and 4 are both raising taxes. And I don't think,
Skip that.
Yeah.
let's get those. Okay.
Next.
And then option
Well,
5.
number 4 though, could you talk a little about
Sure.
that one?
Absolutely. So this is number 4 is levying a property tax for the park, for a park and rec or a public safety millage. I mentioned public safety because typically voters are more apt to approve a levy if it's for public safety. Now, we currently pay our police force from the general fund. All of our parks expenses also come from the general fund. So if we were to ask for the voters to approve a levy for public safety, that money that we would raise from that levy would go to public safety, absolutely. But the money that is freed up from the general fund would then be diverted to parks.
I see. Or you could propose on the ballot something like increase police force, employees, officers, cruisers,
Yes, absolutely.
something like that.
Or if you
It's
just want to,
detailed in the proposal along with the parks.
correct. Or you could just flat out ignore the public safety aspect of it and say this is just for parks and see if the public wants to approve that. Lots of different avenues you could explore there.
Other than it being a tax, what is it that you don't like? Anything else you don't like about number 4 option?
It's not, well, it's not a continuous stream of revenue, so you have to cap those at either 5 or 10 years or make them a continuous levy, which I don't think are very common. 5 or 10 year levies are typically what go through for voting.
Okay. I see.
So 1 mil, if we were to ask for 1 mil, that would generate about $230,000 a year from property tax. And homeowners would pay an extra $100 a year on a $100,000 home. So 1 mil, if you have a $200,000 home, you're paying $200 extra a year on your property tax.
When I was on the school board, if we went for a 1 mil something, we identified the amount of money it would generate.
Mhm.
And then when new people moved in, the millage dropped and the dollar amount stayed the same. Is it still that way?
Yes, it is.
Okay.
Mhm. That's the way it works.
So your dollar amount can't increase. You cap that too.
Correct. It's capped, correct.
Hmm.
Now, the assessed value changes, well, the auditors assess that every year. Well, every 3 years, I believe they go out and do an assessment adjustment. But the assessed valuation is updated every year by the county auditor. So that number, so the millage number will change every year depending on what the county auditor has calculated. There's not much else I really don't like about those types of levies. I think they're easier to pass than like an income tax income tax increase.
Mhm.
Although going back to the income tax, Sunbury is very low at 1.0%. It's probably the lowest in Delaware County. I'm not sure if there are any other cities lower. But in central Ohio, that's very, very low,
Mhm.
which is great for the residents. Absolutely. And number 5, I just listed to use the NCA money for community facilities. This is already in place. The NCA has already been approved. As we all know, we won't expect to receive any financial distributions from that NCA until about 2025. And I believe the projected amount in that year is only about 200,000, 240,000 roughly, if I'm remembering. So that wouldn't be enough to cover a parks project, but it could help in the future. And I think that's the intention of the NCA, is to go towards community facilities.
Which NCA is this?
The Sunbury NCA, the Parkway.
At least the first part, I think, is pretty direct in terms of where the revenues are going. It's going towards the Parkway.
Okay. So then maybe I'm wrong, maybe it's not. I have to read through it and see where the stipulation is for where the funds go.
I think additional property that gets added, we can negotiate terms to do things like
Okay.
this. And then one other funding source is Rolling Hills, Price Ponds both have lot premiums that go to the Parks Fund. I think
Trees.
Magnolia Park may too.
Mhm.
Like Rolling Hills is something like $750 a lot, and Price Ponds is $250 a lot. And that's not a big drop in the bucket, but it's in the hundreds of thousands of dollars.
Yeah.
Are you talking about the trees?
Yeah.
Tree impact fees for trees? Yeah.
Yeah.
Or it's not an impact fee per se,
Right.
it's just the tree.
True. We put that in when we passed those 2 developments. I remember the one figure I remember was 155,000.
There
I
is,
think that was on the first Rolling Hills.
Right,
there is an impact fee for Parks and Rec,
right.
which right now we're collecting, I think it's $412.50, and that's only 25% of the full amount.
Right.
Mhm.
Yeah, so the one for Rolling Hills and Price Ponds specifically, it's like a tree mitigation fee
Mhm.
for the amount of trees they took out. That does go directly to parks.
Yep.
And then we've got the impact fees.
That'll come from the county, right?
Yes, it'll come from the county.
All right, very good. Awesome.
So on the next page, sorry, I just wanted to briefly talk about grants and loans.
Mhm.
I went into this research kind of thinking, oh, there's gotta be lots of grants and loans for parks. Well, there's really not. There's not a lot of loans and grants available for parks and facilities and things like that. Lots of things for infrastructure and even more for bike paths and things.
Mhm.
Unfortunately, park facilities don't get a lot of attention when it comes to grants and loans from the county or the state. There is one Nature Works grant program through the Ohio Department of Natural Resources. And that's a reimbursement grant, and they'll reimburse up to 75% for development or rehabilitation of recreational areas. Typically for the Nature Works grant, they award smaller amounts, on average about $25,000. So it would be a drop in the bucket for a project such as this, but certainly something that we could use if we wanted to get some ADA compliant sidewalks or some playground facilities, things
Mhm.
like that.
But then.
Drops in the bucket do add up.
They do.
Yeah.
Yeah.
State and federal budget, we didn't mention those, but those are ones where we need to pursue as well.
Mhm. And you recommend personally number 2?
My recommendation as of today, without really knowing much about where this whole park project will eventually end, would be option number 2. And that was the one where we talked about reducing the borrowing for the facilities and adding in more money into the bond package for a park.
The $3 million, did that come from, was it an educated guess, or where did that number come from?
No,
Yeah,
I think 3 million was actually the top end number.
that's right. If we want,
Yeah, J.R. Smith is more like $1 million-ish. I thought $1.5 million-ish.
I would say it's probably, in my mind, only been closer to 2.
It might be
But-
growing.
3 million is at the very high end for high quality material, pavilion materials, like a metal roof versus shingle look.
But a consultant or somebody has gone through and like itemized what the plan says.
A couple of years ago, we had a
Okay.
rough cost estimate. I
Okay.
think it was between 1.5 and 2.
So that is one of the things we're working with CT consultants on. So we're trying to hone in on the scope of an improvement to J.R. Smith Park and what the cost of that would be. Based upon the community feedback that we've received and, and what's in the master plan and all that kind of stuff. So.
We have a touch base next week with CT and then Parks shortly thereafter. And that's when we hope to make a decision. We have enough information to decide what we want to do, what we want it to look like, and the cost.
Okay. And CT's formulating that estimate, is that right?
Well, like Mr. Ghost said, I mean, we're gonna, we still need to refine the scope of what actually is going to happen down there, because part of the public meeting was really also trying to identify what kind of quality of amenities to add. Right? We said, okay, there's a pavilion, for example, but there could be a $300,000 pavilion, there can be $100,000 pavilion. So we've received some feedback on that. I think that's what we need to kind of cost out.
And that's what's happening. I sent a note out for everybody to review that and look at some pictures, and we're going to come to the next Parks meeting prepared. But between now and then, we have our touch base next week where I'm going to get some photos. I think I already got some photos out, but I'm looking at some other renditions to consider, along with whatever CT has to bring to the table. All right.
And then just on number 2, where it says 14.7% of income tax, and that's pushing us right up into the invisible 15% line. I mean, when I think about what we talked about at the retreat, number 1, J.R. Smith was definitely part of that. I mean, we're talking about investing in core and streetscape plans. I mean, those aren't cheap, especially if we're going to implement them on a year-over-year basis. So I think we've got to really probably start having some discussions about, are we paying cash out of pocket for streetscape improvements and walkability and all the things that are going to come along with that? Because
maybe the bond for the facility stays on its own, and then we combine J.R. Smith with the square. Instead of combining it with the facilities, we could combine it with the square, the revitalization.
Well, right, but either way, like J.R. Smith currently right now in the facilities would push us up to 15%.
Yes.
So even if we pull J.R. Smith out, then if we add it back in with the streetscape, now we're over the 15%, right?
Yeah.
How much is streetscape? 1 million?
At least.
At least, I mean, depending like how far you're going.
Oh,
It's probably 1.5 to 2
Yeah.
to do it
we
right.
did budget $1 million this year for street.
Yeah, that's street maintenance.
Oh, street maintenance.
Yeah.
Not streetscape, sorry.
And what's the parks budget? It has a big amount in there now. There's $400,000. What's that for?
That is for current fallen heroes, I believe.
Volunteers.
The
Trails.
Yeah.
Okay.
Sure.
Yeah, some part of that's the trail. I think the other part of that was reservoir. Some of that's in there from the
I was
reservoir.
gonna say, this happened before I arrived, but I think, was that part of the capital transfer that happened a year and a half, 2 years ago? Again, so 4 million in total, but there was an additional amount sent to the parks. That, I think that's still that parks money that was transferred back then.
Mhm.
All right, last question. ARPA funds, how much do we have and when do they do?
670,000, and we need to make a plan by the end of next year.
Thank you.
Cannot use that for parks.
Mhm.
You can't.
Can-
You should be asking us.
What do you got, Mark?
Council may use that for whatever they wish.
Fiber?
No, I mean, I was talking about wastewater treatment plant, trying to take the Cheshire Road pump station offline. Because right now it's, I mean, I won't go into all the detail. That needs to come offline or the bottom line. Yeah, that's been earmarked for that for at least 2 years.
Okay, yeah, I agree. That's been the operating assumption, is that it's going to be used for wastewater improvement.
We're still on time.
Okay, moving on, a few minutes left. Bank to book reconciliation and the monthly variance reports. Dana, anything in particular
Yeah.
we should be aware?
Thank you. There's not really much on here that I wanted to go over for the monthly variance reports. Everything is lining up quite nicely as far as revenues and expenses go. I mean, there's a few lines in the expenses where we're a little bit over budget, but nothing that is blatantly going to really mess things up in the future. So nothing really to bring to your attention, but I'm happy to answer any questions. And then as far as the bank to book reconciliation, I've just put a short little reconciliation on the front page of your agenda to keep things more simple. So we have a total bank balance as of April 30th of $18,100,520.84. Outstanding checks of $213,000, which brings our bank balance to around $17,887,000. I also listed our year-to-date income tax collections by category for 5 years in history. Currently, we are at 1.335 million collected, which is 34.24% of our total annual budget. So we are slightly higher than where we expected to be at this point for our income tax collection. So we're looking good.
What kind of interest rate are we earning? And
Interest rate continues to go up on Star Ohio is about 4.9%, I believe.
wow.
Yes, continues to go up.
Are they paying that on our current balance of 7.3
Yes.
million?
Yes,
We made 140 grand in interest this year so far.
yes. Significant.
What's Fifth Third and Commonwealth pay? Are those savings or
First Commonwealth,
checkings?
First Commonwealth is a checking.
Okay.
And the Fifth Third is the securities, the investments.
Oh, okay.
Mhm.
So the checking pays nothing, I presume.
The checking pays, it's about 3%.
Oh, okay. That's better than nothing.
Mhm.
Slightly.
Can you research if you can use TIP funds for streetscape improvements? Infrastructure?
My first thought is you can if it's written in the language. Like I know we can use TIF funds for community facilities, parks, if it's written in the language. I assume it would be the same.
Language hasn't been written yet, so we can write it in language.
You can also adjust TIFs to include other stipulations for how the payments will be made in the future.
Here's what I'm thinking, and this, not just throwing out stuff. We're gonna tip Romanelli's apartments and the commercial space across from Barry Bennett's buildings. And I've already explained that to the schools. One thing we need to do, we still need to do traffic improvements on Sunbury Meadows Drive.
Mhm.
We're looking at,
The calming mechanisms.
right, traffic calming. But I think there's gonna be additional funds to be able to do some streetscape improvements as well, if they're permissed by law to be able to do that.
Okay. Anything further for us, Dana?
I don't have anything else. Thank you.
Any questions? For Ms. Stefan?
It's a really good meeting.
No questions, Mr. Martin?
No,
Okay, any other unfinished business? Motion for adjournment.
So moved.
Motion by Cooper.
Motion by Ms. Cooper, second by Mr. Mayor. Discussion, roll call.
Mrs. Cooper? Yes. Mayor St. John?
Yes.
Mr. Martin?
yes.
Mr. Capel?
Yes.
Mr. Grumney?
Yes.
Mr. Ghost?
Yes.